All right, so get ready because we are diving into a world where once a year, for one night, all crime is legal. That's right, the Purge franchise. And you guys have given us a ton of material, like articles and notes and all kinds of stuff about these movies and the TV show. It's a lot to get through.
It's true. The Purge really throws a lot at you.
Mm.
In the surface, it seems like this kind of crazy, almost outlandish concept, but the way it uses that concept to look at some real social issues is really what makes it more than just a regular horror movie.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so cool about this. I mean, we're not just dealing with some like slasher in a mask here. This is about class and power and all the anxieties that come with living in the world today. So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, I think a good place to start would be with how the franchise itself has evolved over time. The first film, The Purge, it came out in 2013, really sets the stage right. It's very much a home invasion thriller, but it has this really unsettling question just lingering in the background. It makes you think, like, what would you do if crime was legal for 12 hours? What would you do?
I mean, yeah, that's what hooked me right away. It's like this messed up social experiment playing out right there on the screen. You've got the Sandine family, all safe and sound, barricaded in their home, and then their son makes the decision to help this total stranger.
And that one seemingly small act of compassion throws their whole world into chaos. I mean, it's a pretty classic horror movie trope, but it takes the stakes way beyond just surviving, right? Because now we're forced to look at the ethical problems, the dilemmas that this purge night creates.
And it makes you think, like, all those super fancy security systems they have, are those just for the purge? Or is that supposed to be like a commentary on how the rich already isolate themselves from everybody else? It's almost like they're saying gated communities are just going to get more and more extreme.
Exactly. And that's where those first ideas about society start to show up. Then in The Purge, Anarchy, that's the sequel, from 2014, they throw us right out onto the streets of LA. And suddenly, it's not just one family's problem anymore. It's a whole bunch of different people from all walks of life just trying to make it through the night.
And that's when you really see how big the class divide is. It's like you can actually see the difference between the people who can afford to just hide away in their fancy houses versus those who have to fend for themselves out on the streets.
Absolutely. I mean, visually, it's very striking. All the armored cars and the private security forces, you know. It's almost like some kind of messed up safari where the wealthy are the hunters and everyone else is just prey.
Okay, hold on. That is officially the bleakest safari I have ever heard of. But it does make you wonder if the filmmakers are trying to say that this is where we're headed as a society, with the gap between rich and poor getting wider and the way security is becoming more and more private.
It's definitely something the film wants us to think about. And I think that's a big part of why The Purge is so popular. It taps into very real anxieties we have about society falling apart and the question of who gets left behind when that happens.
So we've got this home invasion, then the chaos on the streets. Where does the franchise go from there?
Well then, in 2016, The Purge, election year, came out. And in this one, things get very political. We're introduced to Senator Charlie Roan. She's a survivor of a purge night. Now she's running for president. And her whole platform is, I'm going to end this purge. But of course, there are powerful people, the new founding fathers of America, who aren't going to let that happen. Not without a fight.
Now, this is where things get really interesting, at least for me. Because Senator Roan isn't some big action hero. She's trying to figure out how to deal with this violence, how to fight it. And it's not simple. It makes you wonder, are there any real-world politicians or political debates this reminds you of?
Oh, absolutely. Her character really makes us think about whether there are easy answers in a system that's already so messed up.
And then there's the whole question of, like, why the NFA even started the purge in the first place.
Yeah.
Do they actually believe all that stuff about it being a catharsis, a way to reduce crime? Or is it something way more sinister?
Right, like population control, social engineering, maybe a way to hold on to their power. The Purge, election year, definitely makes you think it's all part of some big plan.
Which brings us to The First Purge from 2018. Now, this one's a prequel that takes us back to Staten Island, to the very beginning of this whole horrible experiment. And what I thought was so interesting about this one is how directly it deals with race. Like, it's right there in your face.
Yeah, and that's really what makes The First Purge so powerful. It exposes how the NFFA is lying. We see how they specifically target poor communities, minority communities, offering them money to take part, knowing that these people are the most vulnerable.
It's chilling. And it's hard not to think about the injustices that happen in the real world. It makes this fictional concept feel a little too real, you know?
Definitely. And it makes you question everything the NFA says about the purge. Is it really about less crime, Or is it about getting rid of the people in power don't like?
And then we have the Forever Purge. That was 2021. And this time, the violence just doesn't stop and the siren goes off. Some groups decide to ignore the time limit and keep purging, and the result is, well, basically society collapses.
Yeah, it's like the filmmakers are asking, what if the purge wasn't just one night? What if it became our way of life? And the answer, at least in the movie, is terrifying.
I mean, we're talking white supremacy, law and order just gone, basically a war for, like, the soul of America. It's pretty bleak. But you know what? Even with all that darkness, I find myself really drawn to the characters in this whole franchise, especially those who somehow find a way to be, well, good in the middle of all the craziness.
I agree. The characters are a huge part of what makes The Purge so interesting, and they're probably a good place for us to go next. I mean, we can't talk about this franchise without talking about people like Leo Barnes or Senator Charlie Roan or even Dimitri from the first Purge. Each of them shows us a different way to react to this world, to this new reality.
Yeah, I like that. Let's do that because those characters, for me, they're the heart of the story. They're the ones who make you ask yourself, how would I react? What would I do? Would I be swept up in all the darkness? Or could I find a way to, stay human?
So let's talk about Leo Barnes. We meet him in The Purge, Anarchy, and he's this tough ex-soldier out for revenge. But over time, in Anarchy, and then again in election year, he changes. He becomes more of a protector, putting his life on the line to save others.
I really like how his character develops. He's like wrestling with all this darkness inside him, trying to find some good in this crazy world. But I also have to wonder, is it really that easy? Can you really go from like wanting revenge to being a hero just like that?
No, it makes you think, doesn't it? Is it real change or just how he's reacting to extreme circumstances?
Yeah.
I think the movies leave that open for us to decide. But the way his character changes, I think it does give you a little bit of hope that even when things are really bad, some people still hold on to their humanity.
Yeah, okay. So Leo is kind of like the reluctant hero. And then there's Senator Roan. She's fighting the system from the inside. She could have just stayed hidden, kept herself safe, but she chooses to risk it all to try and end the purge.
And the thing about her is, she's not, naive. She gets it. She knows how corrupt the whole system is. But she still believes that fighting for what's right is important, even when the odds are totally against her.
She's like a symbol of like resistance, a symbol that things can change. Let's be real. In a lot of these dystopian stories, the good guys, they don't win. But Senator Roan, she actually has a shot at making a difference.
And we can't leave out Dimitri from the first Purge. He's this community leader who won't let his people become victims. He gets them to fight back against the government's experiment, even though it puts him in a lot of danger.
He's such a great example of like grassroots resistance. He makes me think of all those historical figures who stood up against oppression, even when everyone told them they had no chance. Dimitri shows us that sometimes real change has to start from the bottom up.
Totally. He's not a politician or a soldier. He's just a regular guy who finds this incredible courage to stand up to injustice. And his story really highlights the idea that even in a really oppressive system, community and coming together, that can be a real force for change.
As we talk about all these characters, it keeps coming back to me that the purge isn't just about the violence itself. It's more about the choices people make when faced with that violence. It's about what those choices say about us, about human nature.
I think that's a big part of why this franchise is so much more than just a horror movie. It forces us to ask, what would W.E. do? Would we give in to the darkness, or would we be able to hold on to our values? It's a question that sticks with you even after the movie's over.
You know what else sticks with you? The whole cultural impact of the purge. I mean, you see those masks everywhere now, at protests, all over social media. It's like it's become a symbol for something, but I'm not really sure what.
I know. It's so interesting, right? It's like the franchise has hit some kind of nerve, something people really connect with. Those masks, I think, they represent a kind of deep fear we have, like a fear of lawlessness, of society collapsing. But also maybe a weird fascination with the idea of letting go of all those rules and doing whatever you want.
Earlier you mentioned how these movies have been really successful. And it's kind of surprising to me. I mean, they're pretty dark and violent. You wouldn't think they'd be that popular with a mainstream audience.
But maybe that's the whole point. Maybe there's something cathartic about watching these stories. It's like we're facing our own fears, our own anxieties, but in a safe way, because it's just a movie.
Like watching a horror movie is therapy. Okay, I can kind of see that. But then I think about that line between entertainment and exploitation,
Yeah.
Are they just using our fears to make money, or are they actually giving us a way to deal with them?
That's a tough one. And honestly, I don't think there's an easy answer. But one thing I've noticed is that the franchise has definitely changed over time. The later films, like the first Purge, they're much more direct about their message. They're not afraid to talk about things like race and class and the way the system is stacked against certain people.
True. And that might be because of the criticism the first few movies got. Some critics said the franchise was glamorizing violence, even though it was trying to criticize it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the filmmakers have become more aware of that. There's still a lot of violence, but now they're more careful to show what that violence actually does, the toll it takes on people.
Which brings us to the TV series. It really goes into those consequences, right? You said you were a fan of the show. What did you like about it?
Well, for me, the TV show does something the movies can't. It really expands the whole Purge universe. It's an anthology, so each episode is about different characters and what happens to them during different Purge nights and even after the Purge is over. We get to see, like, up close, how the Purge affects everyday people, not just the main characters or the action heroes.
So it's not as much about the spectacle, the violence itself, it's more about the human stories.
Right. We see people having to make these impossible decisions, dealing with these huge moral questions, just trying to survive in a world that's gone totally crazy. And what's really interesting is that the show doesn't shy away from the long-term effects of the Purge. It shows how it tears families apart, how it destroys communities, and how it leaves these deep scars on the people who live through it.
That's the really disturbing thing about the whole purge idea. It's not just one night of madness. It's the way it keeps affecting things, how it breaks down trust and caring for each other, and ultimately the whole foundation of society.
And that's what makes The Purge, both the movies and the TV series, so relevant to what's going on in the world today. We may not have an official Purge night, but things feel more violent, more divided, and the political stuff is getting pretty extreme. And these stories, they force us to look at that and to ask ourselves, are we going down a really dangerous path?
Ooh, that's a pretty heavy question to end on, but a good one. We've really gone deep into the Purge franchise, and I gotta say, it's been quite a journey. We talked about how the movies have changed over time, the characters, the themes, and the way this whole thing has impacted our culture.
And we've asked a lot of questions along the way. Questions about ourselves, about the world we live in, about the kinds of choices we make when things get really bad.
And in the end, I think that's what makes The Purge so powerful. It's not just entertainment. It's something to talk about, to think about. It's like a mirror, showing us our anxieties, our fears, but also maybe our ability to hope and to bounce back. It's like, is it a warning or like a messed up fantasy? Because like we all have days where we just want to, I don't know, scream at someone or punch something.
Right. It's that thing inside us that, we're supposed to keep under control. But the Purge kind of lets us look at that darkness to imagine what would happen if we didn't have those rules. And maybe that's why people like it. It's a way to think about those things without actually doing them.
I guess that makes sense. It's like letting off steam. But I still keep coming back to that question you ask. What would WE actually do if there was a real purge? It's easy to say we'd be the good guy, the hero. But how do we really know unless it actually happened?
Yeah, no way to know for sure, right? I mean, it's easy to say what you believe in, what's right and wrong. But when things get that crazy, who knows? And I think that's what makes these stories so interesting. They make you think about those hard truths about yourself.
You know, one of the articles you sent me talked about how the purge shows how people don't trust institutions anymore. Like in those movies, the government is part of the problem. Do you think that's why people relate to it today?
Oh, for sure. I mean, look around, right? Nobody trusts the government or big companies or any of the people who are supposed to be in charge. And the Purge plays on that fear that, like, nobody's actually looking out for us.
It's like that primal fear of, like, anarchy, of all the rules just disappearing. And that's probably why it's so popular all over the world. It's not just an American thing.
Exactly. The things that the Purge is about, they go beyond any one country. They're about what it means to be human, about the good and the bad that we're all capable of. And I think that's why so many people around the world connect with it.
So we've talked about all the bad stuff, the fear, the problems with society. But is there anything hopeful about the purge? Or is it all just going downhill from here?
I think you can find hope in the characters, the way they never give up. Even when things are so violent and cruel, they find ways to fight back, to protect the people they care about, to be good.
Yeah.
And that gives me hope. It shows that even when everything's falling apart, people can still be strong.
That's a good way to look at it. We've really dug into the Purge franchise, and wow, what a ride. We've gone through the whole evolution of the movies, those complex characters, the themes that make you think, and the way this whole thing has become part of our culture.
And along the way, we've asked a lot of questions. Questions about who we are, about our world, about what we would do if things got really, really bad.
And in the end, that's what I think makes The Purge so powerful. It's more than just a movie. It makes you start thinking, talking. It's like holding up a mirror to ourselves, to our fears and anxieties, but also maybe to our ability to hope and be resilient, to bounce back.
So as you guys keep thinking about all this, keep those questions in mind. What does the purge make you think about? What choices would you make? And the biggest question of all, what can we do to make sure that a night like the purge stays in the movies and never ever happens in real life?